our relationship together. So we saw, first of all, the power of cross-generational effort in Turkey. When you look at this thing that's called the Gulen Movement, you see what on the surface looks like a young man's movement, and yet what we saw were sometimes 3 or 4 generations of individuals working together. I think that's healthy. Some of our churches could learn from that. I'm sure some of you have faith communities that might be able to learn from that, because you have a ministry for your children, a ministry for your youth, and a ministry for your young adults, your married, your single, your older adults. But faith families really should be a family, and what we saw in Turkey was the power of that sort of cross-generational effort. Second thing we saw was a group of people who speak very quickly, as Marat did tonight, and very boldly to the violent elements of those who claim their faith. And in doing so, they're really teaching, I think, all of us, regardless of our faith, to speak against the violent tendencies within our own spheres of influence. Our group landed in Istanbul in September, less than a week after the attacks on the U.S. Embassy in Benghazi. And our friends were very quick to condemn that attack. We've discussed this and other issues since, and I can tell you they genuinely deplore violence that's committed in the name of their faith. And it's that strong opposition that's actually encouraged this Christian, this follower of Jesus, to examine the violent tendencies that sometimes can rise up and regrettably be committed in the name of Jesus. And here's what I learned from that. When most of the world thinks of Islam, what do they think? When we in the West look at it in the media, we look at this faith, and we see an image like, for example, masked men shooting a young girl for no more than wanting an education. Or if we look at more recent events like the bombing in Boston 2 weeks ago, and we later learned that the perpetrators were tied to radical organizations, and the temptation is almost immediately to see that violence as inherent in the faith itself. And here's the problem with that. When you look at that picture and simply declare and assume that is Islam, you forget, and I do too if I make that assumption, that people, extremists of every sort and kind, often appeal to their faith of origin as a source of authority. It's hard to argue with somebody when they say, God told me, right? I mean, that sort of stops the dialogue. It sort of stops the conversation. I'm a native Southerner. I know this from experience. I grew up in South Carolina. If you go back far enough in my family tree, you will find individuals who intimidated minorities in the weak. They did it while they were wearing a white mask and with a burning cross in the background, and they did it under the mantra of Christian. And I'm very thankful that no one generations later looks at that picture and says, well, all Christians are that way. We have to be careful. And the best way to understand what we believe and learn each other is to simply talk to each other and be at the kinds of events that our friends are hosting for us tonight. I'm grateful to be in agreement with my friends who believe that neither of our religions should be defined by the cowards among us who would commit such atrocity, nor should we tolerate those within our own ranks who do harm to anyone, regardless of their faith, their background, or where they come from. They're human beings. We believe they're created in the image and likeness of God, and violence is unacceptable.